What is your expectation for kind of what we should see play out at Caroline Ellison's sentencing?
I don't view it as a close call.
Yeah,
If she got a day in jail, I would fall off my seat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Akash Network, the world's premier decentralized compute marketplace. Check out Akash to buy and sell computing resources securely and efficiently. Purpose-built for public utility at akash.network. All right, back on Coinage with us, the former lead prosecutor who took down Bernie Madoff, Marc Litt. Back on Coinage. Marc, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, man.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while since we chatted. Obviously, we already went through the whole SBF defense. We saw how that went. We saw the ruling and sentencing for 25 years. Now, the big question is next in the line of people who the government has taken on here in the FTX collapse, and that would be Caroline Ellison. And we talked a little bit about her, but I just want to start with your thoughts here. One of those favored kind of witnesses that helped the government a lot, as they note in this memo presented to the judge. What is your expectation for kind of what we should see play out at Caroline Ellison's sentencing?
Well, my bottom line is I would be very surprised if she were to receive any kind of jail sentence. Frankly, I'd be surprised if she even got a sentence involving home detention. The government wrote an extraordinary 5K letter. That's the letter that is sent by the prosecutors to the judge on behalf of a cooperator prior to sentencing, that allows the judge to depart from the U.S. sentencing guidelines. And I think, as we've talked about before, the sentencing guidelines are just that. They're a starting point that a judge must consider in framing a sentence for a defendant. The letter that is written, the 5K letter, is a very important signal to the court, and it also authorizes the court under the law to deviate at will from the sentencing guidelines.
And the guidelines themselves, we should note, as we were talking about before we started here, pretty wide range in terms of the technical maximum sentence that Caroline Ellison could receive. We saw the same thing with SBF. Technically, 110 years, I think, for Caroline Ellison. The expectations, though, in terms of where we land is nowhere near that. You're basically looking at either home detention, no jail time whatsoever. I mean, how do you kind of look at this realistically to arrive at your odds of what we see?
Sure. Well, realistically, I would put the odds at between 0 and a year and a day to cap the top. A year and a day, why the day? As for sentences longer than 1 year, a defendant is entitled for credit for good time served if they're incarcerated, a 15% credit. So, but I don't think, as I said earlier, any kind of jail sentence is in the offing. The letter, so the way this works and the way these 5K letters work is they're written in a kind of code. You don't, as the government, you don't tell the court what to do. The role of the letter is to explain the value of the cooperator to the government and its case and cases, and to give the judge, a picture of everything they did to provide substantial assistance, because that's the test under the guidelines as to whether you get credit for cooperation, whether the court is released from following the guidelines, considering the guidelines. And the letter that the government wrote in this case is extraordinary. The letters range, in my experience, from very pro forma letters that say, so-and-so helped us and provided substantial assistance because without this person's timely cooperation, we could not have done X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be written in, 3 pages, 2 pages, 3 pages. this letter is over the top in terms of getting into extraordinary detail about what it is Ms. Ellison did, when she did it, the timeliness of her cooperation,
Hmm.
the personal risks that she took, um, lots of detail about documents that she reviewed and decoded for the government, lots of effort to describe how she helped the SEC and the bankruptcy trustee, and helped to get assets back to investors. Just really an all around extraordinary, over the top letter. And judges um, are very attuned to the subtleties of these letters,
Yeah.
the adjectives that are used. That's why I say it's in code. I mean, it's not literally in code, but the way, the tone of these letters communicates a lot to the sentencing judge.
Yeah.
Sentencing judges see lots of these letters, um, and they know sort of what the average one looks like, and they know what the medium one looks like, and they know what the over the top one looks like. And this is sort of beyond the over the top one.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
you were talking about how few pages normally exist in these, and this one, I think, if I was looking at it, is definitely more than 10. Um, and they also kind of go ahead and, it's the same judge, by the way, that was there for the case, for
yeah,
SBF's trial. And in that, they also say the government cannot think of another cooperating witness in recent history who has received a greater level of attention and harassment. Keep in mind, Caroline Ellison's diary was released as part of this when SBF was kind of at trial, and you and I discussed that back then too. So it is kind of like the government saying, look, this is a victim here too, which is interesting because I think you got a lot of people who witnessed what happened with FTX and would say she is not a victim. And so for her to land on no prison time, you might have some people who might not be too happy with that. But I am looking at odds right now. And according to Polymarket, right now, people about 42% chance is what bettors are putting on this, that Caroline Ellison receives no prison time. And it sounds like you're saying that's off by a bit.
well, if I were betting, I suppose I should get into this market, and there'd be a nifty way for me to make a ton of money because, I mean, if I really had to bet, I would be pretty close to all in on no jail time. Um, Look, Judge Kaplan saw her testify. Um, Judge Kaplan is well aware of her value to the case. Uh, Judge Kaplan is also well aware of the appeal that was recently filed by Bankman-Fried, which takes the judge to task in numerous ways and seeks the relatively extraordinary remedy of a remand to a different judge by the Second Circuit. Um, the judge is not blind to that. Um, and the judge took steps during the pretrial phase after the release of these diaries to lock up Sam Bankman-Fried because of his attempt to intimidate the witness. So, look, I think the betting odds are wrong, and if I could figure out a way to monetize it quickly, I guess I would.
I would agree with
I
that, but
guess,
it is,
I guess the average bettor probably isn't the former federal prosecutor with 12 years of experience, and then 15 or 20 years on the defense side watching how these things play out. So,
and certainly, yeah, certainly can't speak the code that you just spoke to, and certainly has not taken down the largest financial fraudster in U.S. history either. So I would say yes, your resume probably dwarfs what is existing in that Polymarket betting pool right now. But you do raise the point about the appeal, and that I think is something probably worth asking you because, as you mentioned, it is. I think it was even mentioned during the trial that this would be coming, and a lot of people do think it is a long shot. I mean, in general, not to get into the specifics of the appeal, I don't think you would have read it before we chatted since we were just supposed to chat about Caroline Ellison. But in general, I mean, seeing those play out, it does seem like they are leaning into Judge Kaplan threw out most of his defense that he wanted to say. Of course, that's what you and I spoke about and why that wouldn't have been admissible in court most of the time anyways. And if anyone wants to, they can go watch our series on that. But, I mean, what do you make of the appeal and the likelihood of any of that actually going anywhere?
Well, now you've got me way out over my skis because I have not read the brief. I skimmed it super quickly when it first came out, but I haven't read it, and I'd always like to see what the government has to say to respond, so that I can weigh in my head what the strength of the arguments look like. I guess what I will say is Judge Kaplan is a very experienced, very bright judge who protects his record and has an excellent track record overall with the Second Circuit. On the other hand, the lawyer who wrote the brief is an extraordinary advocate who has had great success in the U.S. Supreme Court, in the Second Circuit, and elsewhere, dealing with white-collar cases in particular, and getting them overturned. So, you got sort of titans on both sides, and I wouldn't want to handicap. I'm not in the betting pool on that one, but
Yeah.
I'll take the under, I guess, on the betting line on Ms. Ellison.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the one. Obviously, we're going to get the official readout of what happens tomorrow. That's the 24th is when her sentencing is scheduled for. And as we kind of discussed, too, before, there's also Nishad Singh and Gary Wong, the other two kind of quote-unquote other heads of the FTX Alameda research machine, also kind of looped in the same way in terms of our discussion before around cooperating witnesses, the ones that helped lead to SBF's conviction, and those two also pleading guilty kind of in the same timeline as Caroline Ellison did. I assume that the same expectations would be there for them if we do see Caroline Ellison not actually get sentenced to jail time, that the same kind of expectations would spill over to them.
I'm not willing to go that far because I'm not as familiar with the value of their cooperation, and the risks that they might have taken, and how forthcoming they were from the start. Look, one of the things that the government points out with respect to Ms. Ellison is how forthcoming she was from the start and how she accepted responsibility immediately and consistently. Typically, when cooperators meet with the government, it's a process and it can be a slog because most people who go and meet with prosecutors and the FBI and try to cooperate, they often minimize their own conduct. And they try to explain some things away or they leave some things out. They're not complete. And it usually, or often can take, 3 or 4 runs at somebody before they finally break down and are fully transparent about their role and what they did and the like. Now, Ms. Ellison was represented by, an extraordinarily experienced and talented lawyer who's now the chairman of Wilmer Hale, who's a former assistant U.S. attorney who was, I think, chief of the securities fraud unit for a number of years. And, he's smart enough and wise enough and experienced enough to know that if you're going to cooperate, you got to be all in and you got to be fully transparent. And that's really the defense lawyer's job in that situation, to prepare the witness so that if they're going to cooperate, that down the road, they're going to be in the best possible position to get the benefit of that cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
And being fully open and accepting of responsibility and the like from the get-go is one of the key things you have to do.
Yeah, that was also called out in the memo as well. The government kind of speaking directly to all of this when it comes to her timeliness in cooperation, which was a big piece of it. Met with the government in a short time span quickly to kind of go through all of these things. So I think generally, from what it sounds like, you're piecing together everything in the code and everything else in the unspoken language that exists in the court to say, very likely that we don't see Caroline Ellison see any jail time when we get the final sentencing from Judge Kaplan tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't view it as a close call.
Yeah,
If she got a day in jail, I would fall off my seat.
well, that's a good way to end it, I suppose, in terms of the likeliness that we will see her not get any jail time. And again, as I mentioned off the top, super helpful in terms of you walking through all this as you did with us during the SBF trial to also equally deliver, I think, the same succinctness in that you would have fallen off your seat if he didn't get to jail time based on everything in that case too. And so you were right then. I have no reason to doubt why you wouldn't be right again. Marc Litt, the former lead prosecutor against Bernie Madoff, I appreciate you coming back on here to chat with us today, sir.
All right. Thanks so much.